Frank had always been proud of staying active. At 73, he walked every morning, avoided sugar, and watched his portions. So when he stepped on the scale and saw 10 pounds gone, he smiled with quiet satisfaction. He thought he was finally getting healthier. What he didn't know was that his body was telling a different story, one that had nothing to do with fat loss. The first clue came in the most ordinary moment. One afternoon, walking up the stairs, Frank paused to catch his breath. His legs felt unsteady, not sore, just strangely weak. He brushed it off. "Must be a long day," he muttered. But deep down, something felt off. A week later, tying his shoes left him slightly dizzy. Another week passed, and the grocery bags he used to carry with one arm now required two. Still, the weight kept dropping. He celebrated the numbers, unaware he was losing what mattered most: muscle. Muscle loss after 70 is not just common, it's expected if nothing is done to prevent it. And it doesn't always look like weakness. Sometimes, it disguises itself as progress. Clothes fit looser, joints feel lighter. The number on the scale looks better. But underneath that surface is a quiet erosion. Muscle doesn't just help you move. It protects your bones, fuels your energy, and stabilizes your balance. Without it, everything from getting up from a chair to hugging your grandchildren starts to change. What made Frank's situation more dangerous was how subtle it all was. He hadn't stopped moving. He hadn't changed his routine. But one small shift, less appetite, was enough to start the spiral. As the body ages, it becomes more efficient at storing fat and less efficient at preserving muscle, especially during weight loss. And without the right signals, like strength training or sufficient protein, it takes muscle first. Frank didn't realize that at his age, muscle loss can happen silently, even while following all the healthy rules. The same walk he had done for years now wasn't enough to maintain strength. The same light meals he once saw as smart were now lacking what his body truly needed. That's the frightening part. Most people don't recognize muscle loss until they feel a sudden, unexplained fragility, a misstep on a sidewalk, a drop in stamina, a bruise that takes longer to heal. And by the time those signs appear, the body has already given up more than it should have. But here's the truth. Frank's story isn't about failure. It's about a hidden reality no one warned him about. The kind of health decline that wears a disguise and fools even the most disciplined. And it starts with something as simple as losing weight the wrong way. It's a strange contradiction, watching the numbers drop while feeling heavier inside. That was Frank's second sign. He expected to feel lighter, sharper, more alive. But instead, mornings became slower. The walk to the mailbox felt longer. And somewhere between week 3 and 4 of his success, he found himself sitting more often than standing. At first, he thought it was just normal aging. After all, people slow down, right? But this was different. This was a tiredness that came from within the muscles, not the mind. A kind of fatigue that sleep didn't fix and rest didn't restore. That's when he began to realize maybe the weight he lost wasn't the problem. Maybe it was what he lost along with it. Muscle is often seen as a vanity metric, something for bodybuilders or athletes. But after 70, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes survival. Muscle powers your daily movements, your posture, your circulation. When you lose it, it doesn't just take strength, it takes energy. It's like removing the batteries from your own body. And the worst part? Most older adults don't feel the loss happening until it's already made everyday life harder. They just feel off, a little slower, a little more winded. They sit down more often, cancel plans without knowing why. Meals become smaller, movements become shorter. But these tiny adjustments aren't about preference. They're compensation for lost power. Frank began skipping his evening walks, not because he didn't want to go, but because his legs didn't feel ready. He would grip the rail longer when standing up. The couch seemed lower than it used to be. None of this looked dramatic, but it chipped away at his independence. And here's the dangerous irony. Because the weight on the scale kept going down, he thought it meant progress. He felt proud, not suspicious. No one told him the energy loss was connected to what he was missing in his diet and his routine. No one told him that without resistance, either from exercise or food, his body would burn through muscle as fuel. This kind of tiredness isn't just physical, it's emotional too. It makes people second-guess their abilities. It makes them feel old, not in years, but in usefulness. Frank didn't feel sick. He just didn't feel like himself anymore. And the connection between his fatigue and his muscle never crossed his mind. Until one moment, he tried lifting a storage box he'd moved every year. This time he couldn't. It wasn't pain, it was absence. The strength simply wasn't there. That moment didn't feel like weakness, it felt like betrayal, because what he thought was working was slowly pulling him down. Frank's favorite shirt was hanging off him. His sleeves, once snug, now fluttered around his arms. His trousers needed a tighter belt. At first, it felt like a victory. Isn't this what health looks like? Dropping a size, feeling lighter, fitting into clothes from a decade ago? But as the fabric loosened, so did something deeper, his sense of stability. What no one told him is this: weight loss can deceive. Fat and muscle often leave the body together, but only one of them keeps you strong. And after 70, the body often chooses to shed muscle first, especially if we aren't feeding it properly or challenging it with the right movements. Frank's shrinking shirt wasn't a sign of regained youth. It was the result of silent erosion. Because while fat cells are stubborn and cling tight, muscle tissue disappears quickly when unused or undernourished. And once it's gone, everything becomes just a bit harder, getting up, carrying things, even standing tall. There's another catch. Fat is soft and stays spread throughout the body. Muscle gives shape, holds structure, and supports the joints. So when someone says you look thinner, it might not mean you look stronger. It might mean you're losing the very thing that holds you upright. Frank noticed something odd when he sat at the dinner table. His pants felt loose, but his knees creaked more. His elbows rested differently on the table, as if they had less cushion to support them. Even holding his grandchild felt slightly more wobbly. His arms weren't trembling, but they didn't feel firm either. And it wasn't just physical, it was emotional. He didn't feel fit. He felt hollow. This is the trap many older adults fall into, thinking that clothes fitting looser always means progress. But that's only true if you're losing the right thing. Without resistance training and enough protein, weight loss after 70 is more likely to be muscle than fat. And that comes with invisible consequences. Less muscle means less glucose control. Less muscle means higher risk of falls. Less muscle even affects how your brain functions. It's not just about appearance, it's about survival and quality of life. That's why Frank's story matters, because it's easy to miss the signs. The compliments from friends, the pride in the mirror, it all covers up the quiet weakening beneath the surface. And now I want to ask you something directly. Have you noticed your sleeves getting looser but walking getting harder? Tell me below if this sounds familiar. I read every comment, because sometimes the body doesn't get smaller. It gets softer, slower, and more fragile. And that's not the kind of progress we should celebrate. Frank never skipped meals. He ate light, stayed hydrated, and followed what most would call a healthy plate. Small portions, lots of vegetables, minimal red meat. But despite his discipline, his body was shrinking in all the wrong ways. What he didn't know is that after 70, your body starts playing by a different set of rules. One of the harshest truths about aging is this: your body gets better at storing fat and worse at preserving muscle. It's not fair, it's not obvious, and it's not your fault. But if you don't adapt your habits, your own metabolism can betray your efforts. Here's why. As we age, something called anabolic resistance kicks in. It's the body's natural decline in its ability to build or even maintain muscle, especially after meals. So even if you're eating, your muscles might not be listening to the nutrients the way they used to. And when you start cutting calories, hoping to lose a few pounds, the body makes a choice. And that choice is often muscle. Why? Because muscle is metabolically expensive. It burns more energy at rest. Fat, on the other hand, is easy to store and preserve. So when the body senses a calorie drop, it protects the fat and sacrifices the muscle. That's how a well-intentioned diet becomes a slow breakdown of strength and stability. Frank thought he was being smart by eating less and walking more, but walking, while healthy, isn't enough to signal to the body, "Keep this muscle." And eating less protein meant his body didn't have the raw materials to maintain the tissue it needed. It's like asking your house to stay warm without fuel. What's worse, muscle doesn't just disappear. Its absence invites problems. Joint strain, unsteadiness, slower reflexes. And the body, in a cruel twist, often responds by moving even less. The less you move, the more muscle you lose. And the more you lose, the less you move. It's a trap, a loop, but this isn't hopeless. The same way the body is designed to choose muscle last, it can also be retrained to prioritize it. And it starts with two key things: resistance and nutrition. Even gentle strength training, using resistance bands, light weights, or even your own body weight, can signal to your system, this muscle matters. And protein isn't just about quantity, it's about timing and consistency. Small, balanced doses across the day, not just one steak dinner once a week. Frank didn't know any of this at first. He thought he was playing by the rules. But no one told him the rules change after 70. The old strategies stop working, and without new ones, the body starts dismantling itself, piece by piece. But once he understood the biology, he stopped blaming his age and started adjusting his approach. Because the truth is, your body will protect what you tell it to. You just have to know how to speak its language. Frank didn't fall. He didn't stumble. Nothing dramatic happened. But his body started whispering, and at first, he didn't listen. The first sign came in the living room. He went to rise from his favorite chair, the one he'd used for years. His hands pushed down on the armrests just a bit harder than usual. It wasn't that he couldn't stand. It was that he noticed the stand required more thought, more effort. A slight pause before movement. Then came the sidewalk. Frank had always been a fast walker, never rushed, but purposeful. Now he was being passed by younger neighbors. Again, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like being careful. But that caution wasn't from fear. It was the body's quiet warning. You're not as stable as you were. And then, something he couldn't ignore. Holding a coffee mug with one hand suddenly felt less steady. His hand wasn't shaking, but the mug didn't sit as confidently in his grip. It was subtle, barely there, but unmistakable. These are the kinds of signs most older adults overlook, because they don't scream, they whisper, and the danger lies in that subtlety. We think muscle loss means dramatic events, falls, hospitalizations, obvious frailty, but long before those happen, the body gives gentle clues. A little more effort to reach the top shelf, a step that requires more focus, a nap that feels strangely necessary after basic errands. These shifts aren't laziness. They're not weakness of will. They're mechanical changes happening deep in the tissue, the slow unraveling of muscle fibers that once made these movements automatic. Frank kept thinking, I just need more rest. But it wasn't rest he needed. It was resistance. His muscles weren't exhausted. They were disappearing. And because the change was so gradual, he kept adjusting his life around it, sitting more, lifting less, planning his day around energy dips. That's how independence erodes. Not in a single fall, but in 100 tiny hesitations. And many of these signs never make it to the doctor's office. Because when you finally sit on that cold table, you don't say, I hold mugs differently. You say, I feel fine, just a little slower lately. And that's exactly how muscle loss hides itself, in the quiet rearrangements of your daily rhythm. But once you name it, everything changes. Frank began noticing these signals, not as defeats, but as messages, not as aging, but as feedback. And when he saw them clearly, he realized something powerful. His body wasn't giving up. It was asking for help. And for the first time in weeks, he stopped blaming time and started rebuilding trust in his strength. One controlled step, one confident reach, one silent sign answered. Frank had always believed in the golden rule of health. Eat less, move more. It was simple, logical, It had worked in his 40s, his 50s, even into his 60s. So when his doctor gently suggested he drop some weight at 73, Frank didn't question it. He cut his portions, skipped dessert, walked twice a day, and the pounds came off, fast. But so did his stability. What Frank didn't know, and what most people over 70 are never told, is that the old weight loss advice becomes dangerous as we age. Eat less sounds harmless, even responsible. But for older bodies, it often leads to undernutrition, not just calorie reduction. And move more becomes tricky when fatigue and joint pain increase. Without the right kind of movement, the muscle goes first. Here's the problem. Most diets are designed for younger metabolisms. They assume the body is still efficient, still adaptable, still responsive. But after 70, things shift. Appetite naturally declines, taste preferences change, and digestion slows. Add to that the emotional toll of loneliness, grief, or reduced activity, and food becomes both less enjoyable and less frequent. So when a senior cuts calories, they're not just removing extra food, they're often eliminating the few nutrients that were holding their muscle together. And because muscle requires active maintenance, even a small deficit can spark decline. Frank thought a light salad and toast made a healthy lunch. But that meal had almost no protein, no resistance to muscle breakdown. Dinner might have been soup and crackers, warm, comforting, but again low in muscle-building fuel. And day by day, his strength faded, quietly. There's also the myth that cardio is enough. Just walk more, people say. But walking, while wonderful for the heart and mind, doesn't push the muscles hard enough to signal growth, especially in aging bodies. It maintains, at best, but it doesn't rebuild. And without resistance, the body assumes the muscle isn't needed, so it lets it go. The most painful part? Frank was doing everything right. He followed the advice. He tracked his weight. He stayed active, and he still ended up weaker. Because the advice was outdated. What older adults need is not less food, it's better food. Not just more movement, but smarter movement. Meals need to prioritize protein and key nutrients, not just be lighter. And physical activity needs to include strength, not just steps. Frank didn't need a diet. He needed a strategy, one built for his age, his body, his goals. He learned that just because advice sounds familiar doesn't mean it's safe. And sometimes, the rules that once worked can become the very thing pulling you down. Quietly, slowly, until standing up from a chair becomes a struggle you never saw coming. Every morning, Frank stepped on the scale. It had become a ritual, one that brought a small jolt of pride with each lower number. But what the scale couldn't show was what he was truly losing. Not fat, not water, but the very foundation of his physical independence. The bathroom scale tells only one part of the story. It can't measure how steady your hands feel when pouring tea. It can't track how quickly you recover after standing. It doesn't know how many stairs you skip now, not because of choice, but because your legs don't trust you anymore. Frank trusted the scale because it was easy, objective. Numbers felt safe, but strength isn't about numbers. It's about ability. And the moment that truth sank in was quiet but powerful. He dropped a small dish in the kitchen. Not because he was clumsy, but because his reflexes didn't catch it in time. His hands had lost their quickness. That's when he discovered a better test. A doctor introduced him to the grip strength test, a simple measure of how firmly you can squeeze a device or even just someone's hand. Studies show that grip strength is one of the strongest predictors of overall health in older adults. Why? Because it's connected to total muscle mass, coordination, and even survival rates. And the results shocked Frank. While his weight had gone down, his grip strength had also declined, significantly. That's when he realized the scale wasn't just incomplete. It was misleading, because real progress isn't about being lighter. It's about being capable. Can you get off the floor without assistance? Can you carry your groceries with ease? Can you balance on one foot for 10 seconds? These are the new indicators of health after 70. And the scale doesn't see any of them. There's a silent danger in celebrating weight loss without asking what was lost. If you're losing fat, that's a gain. But if you're losing muscle, you're trading independence for applause, and no number is worth that. Frank began doing small checks at home. He squeezed a tennis ball each morning. He practiced standing up without using his hands. He paid attention not to his weight, but to his movements. And for the first time, he stopped feeling like a shrinking version of himself and started feeling grounded again. Here's something you can try right now. Pick up a small object, like a book or bottle, and hold it with your arm extended. Does your shoulder tighten? Do your fingers tremble? If yes, your strength may be asking for attention, because muscle doesn't lie, and neither do your daily movements. The question isn't what your weight is. It's what your weight can still do. Frank had always heard about vitamins, calcium for bones, omega-3s for the heart, but protein? That was something he associated with younger people, athletes, gym-goers, bodybuilders. It never crossed his mind that he might not be getting enough, until his body began showing the signs. At 74, Frank's appetite had changed. He still enjoyed meals, but he rarely felt truly hungry. A bowl of soup, a slice of toast, maybe a banana. It felt like enough. Light, easy, sensible. But none of those meals gave him what his muscles needed to survive. What most people over 70 don't realize is that protein becomes more essential, not less, with age, and not just because of muscle. Protein repairs tissue, fuels the immune system, supports balance hormones, and even contributes to brain function. Without enough, the body begins to scavenge for it, and the first place it looks is muscle. This isn't about eating giant steaks or downing protein shakes like a bodybuilder. It's about frequency, quality, and timing. Frank learned that older adults need more protein per pound of body weight than younger adults, but their bodies are less efficient at using it, meaning it has to be spread throughout the day. A single high-protein dinner isn't enough. His doctor showed him a better pattern. Include 20-30 grams of high-quality protein in every meal, starting with breakfast. That changed everything. Instead of skipping breakfast, Frank began his day with eggs, Greek yogurt, or a protein smoothie with almond butter and berries. Lunch became an opportunity for chicken or tuna salad, beans and quinoa, or cottage cheese with tomatoes. Dinner remained balanced, but now with a clear anchor, salmon, lentils, or lean beef. And it wasn't just about food. It was about what changed because of it. In weeks, his energy returned. His afternoon slump faded. The stairs felt steady again. The mug no longer wobbled. But most of all, he felt solid. Not heavy, not bulky, just steady, present, reconnected to himself. Protein also helped his recovery after simple resistance exercises. His muscles stopped breaking down and started rebuilding, even at 74. It was like his body had been waiting, starved for the material it needed to rebuild the very foundation of his strength. And the best part? It didn't feel like a diet. It felt like nourishment. Here's the truth. You don't need to eat more. You need to eat smarter. Protein isn't just a nutrient. It's a signal. It tells your body, stay strong, stay here. And once Frank heard that message, his body finally started to answer back. Not with weight, not with numbers, but with strength. Quiet, lasting strength. Frank had spent months chasing a number. But now, with protein in his meals and resistance in his movements, something shifted. Something that had nothing to do with the bathroom scale. It started with the garden. One spring morning, he went outside to pull a few weeds. Normally, he'd feel the tug in his lower back, the need to steady himself on the edge of the planter. But this time, his body held firm. His hands were sure. His knees bent without protest. He stayed out there for almost an hour, and when he came back inside, he wasn't winded. He felt capable. That's the difference muscle makes. Strength doesn't always arrive with fanfare. It sneaks back in, through moments that used to feel hard, but now feel natural. And these are the signs that tell you real progress is happening. Standing from a low chair without using your arms, climbing stairs without leaning on the railing, carrying groceries with one trip instead of two, feeling more stable when turning around or stepping backward. These are not small wins. These are reclaimings. Frank began noticing them everywhere. He could lift his granddaughter with both arms again. He stopped needing to sit during long conversations. Even his breathing while walking changed, smoother, more rhythmic, like his body had stopped resisting and started responding. The beautiful irony? None of this was visible in the mirror. His shirt still hung loose. The scale hadn't changed much, but he had changed. Strength isn't about bulk, it's about function. And when you're over 70, it's about freedom. That freedom doesn't require a gym. It can start in your living room, lifting cans, using resistance bands, practicing slow squats next to the kitchen counter. But the key is consistency, not intensity. Your body responds to what you do often, not what you do occasionally. Frank kept a journal, not of his weight, but of his capabilities. Today I walked the hill without stopping. Today I lifted the laundry basket with one arm. Today I reached the top shelf without wobbling. This new way of measuring success transformed everything, because once you stop chasing weight and start noticing strength, you begin to see your body not as a burden, but as a partner, one that's still listening, one that still wants to carry you forward. So ask yourself this: what's getting easier? What's coming back? Not on the scale, but in your life. The answers might surprise you, and they might show you that what you've been building is more than muscle. It's confidence, it's trust, it's power, quiet and returning. Frank once believed his slowing down was just age catching up with him. That's what people said after all. It's normal. You're not young anymore. So he accepted it. He lowered his expectations. He adjusted, until one day he realized something unsettling. It wasn't his age that had changed. It was his muscle, and it had been fading for years. This isn't an uncommon story. Most people over 70 aren't told that weakness isn't always aging. It's often neglect. Not neglect by choice, but by routine, by misinformation, by diets that cut too much, by lives that became quieter, more seated, more passive. Little by little, strength drains away, not because you're growing old, but because no one taught you how to keep it. Frank thought he was doing everything right, but right was based on rules meant for younger bodies. And as he looked back, he realized something that changed everything. He hadn't aged out of strength. He had just stopped feeding and challenging it. That realization lit a fire. He began rebuilding not just with food or movement, but with awareness. He stopped accepting, "I'm just getting old," as an answer. He started asking, is this weakness or is this reversible? That single question gave him more hope than any medication ever had, because once you understand that muscle loss is preventable and even reversible, you stop fearing the future. You begin investing in strength, not just counting years. It's not about chasing youth. It's about owning your power at any age. Frank's days are different now. He doesn't check the scale. He checks how deeply he can squat to tend the garden. He doesn't count calories. He counts how many steps he can climb without stopping. And his body, instead of resisting him, responds. You may feel tired, you may feel unsteady, you may feel smaller in ways that no one else sees. But that doesn't mean it's just your age. It may be your body quietly asking, can we come back from this? And the answer is yes, with the right nourishment, the right signals, the right attention. So let's close with something simple, but powerful. Which of these 7 signs surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, because maybe, just maybe, you're not getting weaker. Maybe you're just waiting to be rebuilt, with strength you still have inside you. It was never about getting younger. It's about choosing not to fade.